the Abscondo Podcast. When I think about how so-called spiritual people, and I guess I'll include myself in that category, when I think about how we talk about awakening, talk about consciousness and finding inner peace, I wonder whether we are really understanding what we went through. I'll speak for myself, but I also want to talk about the story of Eckhart Tolle. And maybe that's the right place for me to start, right? So Eckhart Tolle has been asked many times, and of course in The Power of Now, he describes this, that he says that his awakening happened during severe depression, almost suicidal, or certainly he even does describe it as suicidal levels of depression. He was, people thought that his life was successful. He was accepted into, I think it's Cambridge, and he was at least successful in the academic world, but he was depressed. And one night, during this depression, a sleepless night, he had the thought that I can't live with myself anymore, which really, if you think about it literally, is a suicidal thought. And instead of going the direction of, further despair, he, for whatever reason, he was able to look at that statement and say, wait a minute, who is the I that can't live with myself? Are there two of me? Or if there's only one of me, which obviously we think there is one of us, right? Then which one is the real one, the true one? And for whatever reason, he was able to come to that realization. And as he describes, he was able to spend the next several months, he said 3 months in one interview, where he was in a blissful state, basically going around parks and just kind of finding inner peace and enjoying the present moment. And he then goes on to describe how he later realized what happened, that it was a spiritual awakening. Okay, and then he learned. I think he did do some spiritual study before that. So I'm not sure, to what extent it was a spiritual awakening or whether it was something else. And I want to explore, whether it was something else. And I say this because, he talks about these concepts, but that came later. The concepts came later after he had already awakened, right? So the problem is people who have awakened, and I assure you it's a very real thing because I've been through it, and I'll talk about my experience here in a minute. But the challenge becomes what happens as we go through this transformation. It is a sort of death of the old self and a discovery of a new self, a new life where there's all this peace and there's not this fear and anxiety and endless, worried thoughts. And it's a very real thing that people go through, that, very few people, unfortunately, in today's world go through. And as soon as we do go through it, we immediately understand completely that it's a superior way to live. It's a higher state of existence. And we feel naturally compelled to try to teach what we've learned, to try to share this message of, hey, everybody, wake up. Like, you can all be in this great state of being, and there's no downside to it, and you can totally end unnecessary suffering in life, and there's no downside to it. And what happens is we adopt this kind of strange language, and I admit, and I'm guilty. Guilty is always the wrong word. I do this. I use these concepts trying to convey what I've learned to people who I know would benefit from what might be called an awakening. But as soon as you use these kinds of words and describe these concepts, what happens is a lot of people just tune it out. They just don't get it. They don't want it. They just don't see what you're going on about. And that's just the reality. And, so I'm asking deeper questions about this. Why does this happen? Why don't people believe they can end suffering? Why don't they want to end suffering? And why is it so difficult for those who have done this And there's only one way to do it, really. Awakening is only one thing. It's coming to awaken from the dream of life, to know your true identity, to understand what people have, call God and point to this truth, and to live it, and just to know it completely and let it transform the way you think, the way you feel, your state of being. And there's many words and concepts that can take a person there, but it's really just one thing. And so how do we have such a hard time describing this one thing? Well, I want to even challenge the idea that Eckhart Tolle went through a spiritual awakening. You might need to rewind that and listen to that again. I mean, he's probably the greatest spiritual teacher alive today, and yet I'm wondering if what he went through was really a spiritual awakening, or was it something else originally which got him to that state, right? And let me here's my theory, my hypothesis, okay? A person can tolerate suffering in life. They can tolerate all that garbage to a certain extent. Some people are really good at tolerating it forever, and they become miserable, and they just accept it, and it's just the way life is. They go through what they go through, but they have the ability to just kind of carry that pain. They don't become suicidal. They don't want to change everything. For whatever reason, they hold on to these structures, these mental models, the life situation that's making them suffer, and they can just continue suffering forever. And that's how most people live, with various levels of suffering, some worse than others. But for whatever reason, some people, myself included, Eckhart Tolle certainly included, we just cannot handle that level of suffering. Some people become depressed, and I guess they get, prescription medications and everything else, and they go to therapists, and they somehow cope with a situation and make it an ongoing situation they can live with or bear. And my choice has always been, I got to a point where it happened a few times in my life. The first time was when I was living in Seattle, and I had a pretty good job. I was in my 20s. I was kind of going in the right direction as far as my career, and I had a marriage that I thought was wonderful, and there just my health was good. There really wasn't any problem, except for the fact that I was depressed. I was literally very depressed with this lifestyle of sitting in this silent office listening to the buzzing all around me, and people pretending to be working hard when really we only had 2 or 3 or 4 hours of work every day, and we had to sit there and watch the clock. And I would come home exhausted. I would get obsessed with politics. I would debate politics. I'd argue with everyone. I was a jerk, and I was depressed. And my wife thought that I should go on Prozac or something. And I just said, I don't get that. I just feel like I know why I'm depressed, right? I know what's wrong. I know what I don't like about my life. So why don't I just change that, right? And I probably had many options how I could have changed that, but the way that I did change that is I said, I'm leaving this entire life. I want to live in Europe, at least for a little while. I want to have adventures. I want to travel. I want to just try something totally new. We had no children yet, and she's from Slovakia, and so I convinced her, let's move back to Slovakia for a while and just see how it goes. So rather than trying to and so. That wasn't a spiritual awakening, but it was a choice for honesty and truth in my life. I wasn't happy with the situation, even though I was supposed to be, right? And rather than trying to cope with it further, I decided to live my truth. Eckhart Tolle, when he got to the point of almost being suicidal, and I would never say that I've been suicidal, but I've been very, very depressed. He says he's been suicidal. What did he do? He didn't try to cope with the current situation. He didn't try to cling to the status he was seeking. He decided, screw it. I am going to sit on a park bench and let everything fall apart around me if that's what it takes. I'm going to live my truth. And that's why he felt so good, I believe. That's why he spent those months in bliss, because he felt the power of saying, screw it. I don't want to do these things I'm supposed to do. I want to do what I want to do, and it is okay. And as soon as you make that decision, you find ways in your life to make that work. And you realize that all those fears you had about how you couldn't do what you really want to do, you find out that you can do what you really want to do. It doesn't mean you can become a millionaire overnight because you have a great idea, but I mean literally in this moment, if you want to go sit on a park bench, if you want to move to Slovakia, it's not easy. There are a lot of steps and a lot of things you have to deal with, but you can do what you want to do. It's a choice for honesty. Here's what excites me. It's a choice for truth. The truth is I'm not happy. The truth is this life is never going to make me happy. And it's a choice to honor that. I don't know whether that's what's called a spiritual awakening. I just think it's saying it's letting that the illusion of your life die. Some people, when they get to the point of not being able to go on anymore, they commit suicide. They literally kill their body and the mind and everything. They disappear from this existence. But I believe that the choice that Eckhart Tolle made when he got to that point, the choices that I've made a few times in my life are a different kind of suicide. That's a shocking thing to say, but what I mean by that is you let the egoic self, the ego, those thought patterns that are keeping you trapped, the expectations of other people that are keeping you trapped, the world's lessons about how you're supposed to live and what's going to make you happy that are keeping you trapped, and you let that stuff die. You kill it. And when you do that, you take your own power to live your truth and your honesty, and it feels so good. Your energy goes up. You feel calm. You recognize that you are, for the most part, able to get your food and your shelter and meet people and have relationships and find out that what's real stays. The people who love you really and the people who you love really and who make you feel good are the ones who are still there with you. And I called that when I... And maybe you're wondering why I go by the name of Abscondo, the Abscondo Podcast, and for my music. Well, that was the idea. The idea to abscond is a word that's hardly ever used. It means to run away, taking what is valuable to you with you. So I said, I'm leaving that life, that I'm leaving the parts that I don't like, but I liked the income, so I maintained the ability to work in that industry of software sales, and I still do. But I do so from home with total freedom over my own schedule. I make even more money than I did then. I maintain relationships that mattered to me. I just let the things go that I didn't want, the illusions of things that were supposed to make me happy that didn't. And that's where I got the word abscondo. Actually, a friend called me that out of nowhere, and I was like, what? I never heard the word abscond before. My vocabulary could probably use some work. And so I sort of used that as my moniker for creativity. And I've been creating for the past 14 years based in Europe and sort of digital nomad lifestyle. Now, I recently wrote a book called The Switch, which is about this, which is about the fact that spiritual awakening is impossible without honesty, without wanting the truth, without embracing the truth of what you really feel, what you want in your life, who you really are. And I think that's what Eckhart Tolle went through. And I think that a person, and this is why when you preach spiritual awakening, when you preach the message of spirituality that I do, that Eckhart Tolle does, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, a number of people are doing it very effectively, it doesn't always work because a person isn't ready to change anything. You cannot. This is not a spectator sport. We're talking about the way you live your life. So if you're not willing to abscond from those things you don't like or want or make you feel depressed or miserable, then the message of spiritual awakening doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really deliver that type of bliss and happiness and inner peace that lasts forever if the next day you have to do everything you don't want to be doing at all because you haven't found the courage. You still have the fear that you have to do these things, that you have to maintain this lifestyle. You have to live up to your partner's expectations, your husband or wife. You have to do what your parents expect. And if you're going to make all that real, You can read all the spiritual books you want and watch all the lectures you want and go to the retreats, but if you're not going to live your truth, it's not really a spiritual awakening. So what is spiritual awakening? Is it that simple? Are we overcomplicating it? Is it not just that simple that a person just decides one day, like, I can't take it, I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm going to kill this ego, I'm going to kill this way of thinking? Because that's what happened to me. And it happened again many years later. I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago now, when my marriage was falling apart. I chose a life of freedom those 14 years ago, and I started to realize that I still wasn't free. There were still many, many things that I wanted to be free to experience and to live my truth, and my wife was preventing it from happening violently. Threatening, shaming, blaming, making me guilty, throwing things, whatever it would take to get me to behave according to how she wanted me to behave. And I basically was doing the best I could to maintain the relationship in the marriage, because I do love her and I loved my young daughter at the time. And for many years, I lived in this way that I really, again, wasn't free to be who I am. I wasn't free to live my truth. And during that time, I was sick all the time. Every couple weeks or months, I'd be really sick for a week or more. I was waking up at night terrified, having panic attacks all the time. I was not a good person. I was not treating her well or anybody else very well, to be honest. And again, it was because I had let my life sort of get out of alignment with the truth about who I am, what I want, what excites me, what comes natural to me, what I need to be in order to be happy and enjoy life and be in peace and absent of fear. And all that was completely out of whack, and yet I was still trying to hold on to all those structures that were making me miserable again, until this time it was basically taken away from me. She couldn't, she found somebody else, I guess, who does meet her needs, or her illusion of her needs, or whatever it may be. I'm not going to judge her. She's free to live her life the way that she wants to, but it didn't fit me anymore. And she threw me out eventually. And I, again, was in a situation where now I was free to be whatever I want to be. And I had nothing to lose. It was all taken away from me. Those things that were keeping me miserable were no longer even an option for me. They were gone. And so again, and this is where I went through my real spiritual awakening, where I started to actually devour spiritual literature, where I started to just obsess about this. And I've been actually completely, on a daily basis, as you guys know, I do daily posts on spirituality. It's the core of my life and my existence. But it started, again, it wasn't because I read a great book and decided to change everything. It was because I first changed everything, or had everything changed for me. And I was in a situation where it was possible to awaken, I felt the possibilities of life. I felt the inspiration as well as the fear and sadness. And then when you're in that kind of a situation in your life, then you read The Power of Now, then you read A Course in Miracles, then you read one of my books, then you're given the tools to succeed at becoming a successful version of you. And by successful, I mean you're enjoying life. Your life is abundant. You have what you need. You're free to be who you are and do everything you've ever dreamed of doing and feeling and experiencing. And this is how I've been living. And there's just no restriction to my freedom right now. And it's been that way for a long time. And that's why it's really easy for me to stay in this good place where there's no real fear. There's no real ego. I'm not afraid of anything, because I know that the universe does provide. If we are loving to everyone, to ourselves and to everyone, if we are forgiving to ourselves and everyone, if we're always honest with ourselves and to everyone, and if we are accepting of those we love or everyone, there's a certain harmony to the way life goes. And the world adjusts to who you are. You don't have to always struggle to make true what isn't true, that illusion. You don't have to make that illusion true. You don't have to lie about anything, because the world just has to accept your truth. And I believe that we should talk about spiritual awakening like this, that you don't have to suffer to make that illusion real, to make everyone else's expectations ongoing. Maybe your ex expects too much in child support and you can't afford it. Let it fall, because if you cannot do it, let it go. Let other people's expectations adjust. So far, I haven't done that. So far, I'm trying to maintain what I can for my kids, for everyone who I love. I'm just saying that if it came to the point where something becomes impossible, you have to be willing to walk away, go to a park bench, go to a cheap hotel room and sleep for 2 days, whatever it is that you want to do, get on a train, and just let things fall apart so that you make room for you to live in truth and honesty. And I believe that's a much better alternative to suicide, because you're only killing the stuff that you want to kill, and then the beauty that is you, the love that is you, the creative potential that is you. People need you. Someone either now or in the future needs you, and it's possible to just let that garbage die and for the real you to emerge. And that's what we're talking about here. It's a transformation away from maintenance of illusion, which causes depression and crisis whenever you fail. And we're talking about being you, how to be you in a world that tells you can't. And that's what I believe. When I talk about spiritual awakening, that's what I'm talking about. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave you with another song, Abscondo song. This one's called In the Now.
Dance like the stream flows in the now. In the now. I wanna know like a child knows. I wanna grow like the grass grows. I wanna go where the light goes. In the now. In the now. Fly with the in the now, wanna run where the breeze blows. In the now, wanna dance like the stream flows. In the now. I wanna know like a child knows. I wanna grow like the grass grows. I wanna